What's up, YouTube friends? So today I'm going to start a series on a sampler quilt block quilt. If you don't know what that is, it's just a whole bunch of different quilt blocks all in one quilt. This will end up being a queen size quilt when I'm done with it. I'll be using 12-inch blocks. 12-inch blocks will be perfect, especially for beginners, because you can easily add or subtract blocks to get the size quilt that you want. Now today we will be doing half square triangles, and we're actually going to knock out 6 blocks right off the bat. Now as I mentioned, we'll be doing 12-inch blocks. So a 2 block by 3 block quilt is nice for a baby blanket. 3 by 4 is a nice toddler size blanket. 4 by 5 is a nice lap size or a single. And then by the end of this quilt we'll be doing a 5 by 6, and that'll be about a queen size quilt. If you want to go up to king size, 6 by 6 or 6 by 7 is fine. Now my blocks are going to be completely scrappy. I'm going to try my hardest to get all of my fabric from my scrap bin. I will not be purchasing any fabric or going to my fabric shelf. Now this is just one bin and I have plenty of fabric to choose from. Now the only thing I will be buying later on is the backing as well as the sashing, and whatever I choose to put in the middle for batting. Now if you don't want a scrappy look, right here is a picture of a nice black and white one that I found online. Now as you can see, with just 2 colors, the black and white, this quilt looks beautiful. And this will kind of give you an idea of what our finished quilt will look like. Now I'm going to start off pretty simple with my blocks, and I'm going to be doing a 2 by 2 block. So I'll be doing half square triangles today, and the only thing that I did when I chose my fabric was I wanted high contrasting fabrics. So as you can see, this blue really contrasts against this white. So for example, I would not want to use this white fabric with these red flowers with the white and gold. There's really not that much of a contrast, and it's really not going to make your design pop. So the things you're going to need to make these blocks today are 2 fabrics that measure 7 inches, and this will be my light colored fabric. And then you need 2 blocks that measure 7 inches, and this will be the contrasting fabric. I'll be using this blue. Now to make our half square triangles, I'm going to take one of my light colored fabrics and then one of my contrasting fabrics. I have my right side facing up. I'm going to take my lighter fabric and I'm going to lay it face down. Next, I'm going to take my ruler and a friction pin. You could also just use a regular pin or a pencil. And I'm going to draw a line corner to corner. Then I'm just going to take a couple pins and pin my 2 fabrics together, just so that nothing moves on me. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other fabrics. So next I'm going to take these over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance on either side of my pin mark. That's going to give us 2 half square triangles per set of fabrics. We'll need 4 for these blocks. So I'll meet you over at the sewing machine and I'll show you what I'm going to do. So now we want an exact 1/4 inch seam allowance. Usually I'll just run my fabric along my edge here. It's a little bit fatter than a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but today I'm going to run it right along this groove. So my pin mark is right along this groove. I'll be doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance on either side. And the reason why we want to be very exact today is because when I made these blocks, I'm going to have a little bit of wiggle room that we can trim these down to 12 inches, just to make sure that they're nice and square. I am going to backstitch today with these blocks. If you're going to just finish this off in one day, you really don't need to backstitch, but these are probably going to go into a box until I get all the rest of the blocks finished. So it's a good idea to backstitch so your seams don't come apart. So then I'm just going to break thread, flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Next, I'm going to take my rotary cutter and a ruler, and I'm going to cut right on that line that we drew. So now I'm just going to take these over to my ironing board, and I'm going to iron these open, and I just like to press my seams to the darker fabric. However, depending on what block design you're doing, you may have to come back and repress two of your blocks to the white side just to make sure when we sew these together that our seams nestle up nice and is nice and flat. And then I'm just going to come and I'm going to snip off these little dog ears. You could just use your scissors if you want to. And now you just want to lay them out to the design that you choose. Now for this set, I'm going to do a pinwheel. So that's very simple. So to do that, I'm going to take one of my blocks. In the bottom left corner, I have my white fabric down at the bottom to the right, and then my darker fabric up on the left and on the top. Now for the next one down here at the bottom, I'm going to have my blue fabric facing down and to the left, and my lighter fabric to the top and on the right. Just like that. So then I'm going to put this one so that the blue fabric is facing down and to the right, and my white fabric is on top and facing to the left. And then finally just slide this one in right here so that the light fabric is down to the left, the blue fabric is up and to the right. Now in order to join these together, I'm just going to sew these two together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then these two together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to press my seams to opposite directions, and then I'll sew these two together. So now I'll show you the different variations that we can do with these half square triangles, and this first one is called Homeward Bound. Now of course these will probably have different names depending on your grandmother or where you grew up in the country. So what I'm going to do is leave this one the same, and I'm just going to turn these so that they're all facing the same direction. So that my darker fabric is on the upper right, just like that. And when it's all sewed together, it should look like this. The next block is called Yankee Puzzle. So I'm just going to flip my blocks around so that on the bottom it makes a triangle going this way. And at the top, I want the triangle facing the opposite direction. Just like that. So when it's all sewed together, it should look something like this. This next design is called Streaks of Lightning, or just Zigzag, I've heard it called. So all I'm going to do is turn these ones so that I make the triangle at the top. And then I'm just going to flip these ones around so it will make the opposite color triangle at the bottom. And you can see it's start of a zigzag. When it's all sewed together, it should look something like this. Now the next design is called Broken Dishes. So this one's also very simple to lay out. So I'm just going to match my dark colors corner to corner, and then I'm going to flip it so that it's the opposite color on the other corners. So when you sew that all together, you'll have something that looks like that. And our final block today will be the Flying Geese. So I'm just going to turn my block so that I have a triangle pointing up, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the bottom and have my triangle pointing up. And it should look something like this when it's all sewed together. But for this one, we'll just do the pinwheel. So now I'm just going to take these two blocks. I'm going to line them so that the right sides are together. I'm going to make sure my seams nestle up nicely. So with this pinwheel block, you do not have to repress any seams over. I'm just going to put a pin or two. And then I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine, and with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew right along this edge. And I'll do the same thing for these bottom 2 blocks. Then I just went ahead and I pressed my seams. I pressed them to opposite sides, so this seam is pressed to the left and this seam is pressed to the right. So now I'm just going to take the top one, lay it over the bottom. I'm going to match up my center seams and make sure that they nestle nicely and stick a pin. Now don't worry if they don't match up on the ends, that's fine. I did leave a little room to trim this up later. So I'm just going to take this over to the sewing machine, and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning, sew all the way down, and backstitch at the end. So now I'm just going to give this a good press to make sure that everything is laying nice and flat. So now we just want to trim this up. So what I did was line up my center seam here with the lines on my grid. And then I also went ahead and I lined up my horizontal line with a line on my grid. And this is actually going to finish about 12.5 inches. So I have a 1/4 inch or more hanging over the edges. So I'm just going to line up my ruler, and I'm going to come, this just happens to be 19 inches, but I'm going to come a 1/4 inch off of that line and trim it off. And then I'm just going to do that all the way around. So now we have a nice 12.5 inch squared up block. Alright, so here are the 6 blocks that we made today. I can't fit all of these ones into the frame. I do apologize about that. But just with these 6 blocks alone, it would make a perfect little baby quilt. And you could just pick one of your favorite blocks and then do 6 of those. That'll look perfect. I hope you follow along and stay tuned for this series on my sampler block quilt tutorial. Check out my links down below if you'd like to support this channel or follow me on my social medias. And as always, thanks for watching, happy sewing, and I'll see you next time.